Hello, darling. This is a reading of New Moon with relaxing rain sounds in the background to help you get down to sleep. I hope you're enjoying this book, so please hit like and subscribe to get even more readings. If you'd like to know who I am and find my gaming channel, as well as the main channel for this podcast where you can get even more free readings, then check out all of the links in the description to this video. Now, let's tuck you in, take a nice deep breath for me, and let's get down to sleep. New Moon by Stephanie Meyer. Unnaturally still and white, with her large black eyes intent on my face, my visitor waited perfectly motionless in the center of the hall, beautiful beyond imagining. My knees trembled for a second and I nearly fell. Then I hurled myself at her. "Alice! Oh, Alice," I cried as I slammed into her. I'd forgotten how hard she was. It was like running headlong into a wall of cement. "Bella?" There was a strange mingling of relief and confusion in her voice. I locked my arms around her, gasping to inhale as much of the scent of her skin as possible. It wasn't like anything else. Not floral or spice, citrus or musk. No perfume in the world could compare. My memory hadn't done it justice. I didn't notice when the gasping turned into something else. I only realized I was sobbing when Alice dragged me to the living room couch and pulled me into her lap. It was like curling up into a cool stone, but a stone that was contoured comfortingly to the shape of my body. She rubbed my back in a gentle rhythm, waiting for me to get control of myself. "I'm sorry," I blubbered. "I'm just so happy to see you." "It's okay, Bella. Everything's okay." "Yes," I bawled, and for once it seemed that way. Alice sighed. "I'd forgotten how exuberant you are," she said, and her tone was disapproving. I looked up at her through my streaming eyes. Alice's neck was tight, straining away from me, her lips pressed firmly together. Her eyes were as black as pitch. "Oh," I puffed as I realized the problem. She was thirsty, and I smelled appetizing. It had been a while since I had to think about that kind of thing. "Sorry. It's my own fault. It's been too long since I hunted. I shouldn't let myself get so thirsty. But I was in a hurry today." The look she directed at me was a glare. "Speaking of which, would you like to explain to me how you're alive?" That brought me up short and stopped the sobs. I realized what must have happened immediately, and why Alice was here. I swallowed loudly. "You saw me fall?" "No," she disagreed, her eyes narrowing. "I saw you jump." I pursed my lips as I tried to think of an explanation that wouldn't sound nuts. Alice shook her head. I told him this would happen, but he didn't believe me. "Bella promised." Her voice imitated his so perfectly that I froze in shock, while the pain ripped through my torso. "Don't be looking for her future either," she continued to quote him. "We've done enough damage." "But just because I'm not looking doesn't mean I don't see," she went on. "I wasn't keeping tabs on you, I swear, Bella. It's just that I'm already attuned to you. When I saw you jumping, I didn't think. I just got on a plane. I knew I'd be too late, but I couldn't do nothing. And then I get here, thinking maybe I could help Charlie somehow. And you drive up." She shook her head. This time in confusion, her voice was strained. "I saw you go into the water, and I waited and waited for you to come up. But you didn't. What happened? How could you do that to Charlie? Did you stop to think what this would do to him and my brother? Do you have any idea what Edward... I cut her off then, as soon as she said his name. I'd let her go on, even after I realized the misunderstanding she was under, just to hear the perfect bell tone of her voice, but it was time to interrupt. Alice, I wasn't committing suicide. She eyed me dubiously. Are you saying you didn't jump off a cliff? No, but... I grimaced. It was for recreational purposes only. Her expression hardened. I had seen some of Jacob's friends cliff diving, I insisted. It looked like fun, and I was bored. She waited. I didn't think about how the storm would affect the currents. Actually, I didn't think about the water much at all. Alice didn't buy it. I could see that she still thought I had been trying to kill myself. I decided to redirect. So if you saw me go in, why didn't you see Jacob? She cocked her head to the side, distracted. I continued. It's true, I probably would have drowned if Jacob hadn't jumped in after me. Well, okay, there's no probably about it, but he did, and he pulled me out. And I guess he towed me back to shore, though I was kind of out for that part. It couldn't have been more than a minute that I was under before he grabbed me. How come you didn't see that? She frowned in perplexity. Someone pulled you out? Yes, Jacob saved me. I watched curiously as an enigmatic range of emotions flitted across her face. Something was bothering her. Her imperfect vision, but I wasn't sure. Then she deliberately leaned in and sniffed my shoulder. I froze. Don't be ridiculous, she muttered, sniffing at me some more. What are you doing? She ignored my question. Who was with you out there just now? It sounded like you were arguing. Jacob Black, he's sort of my best friend, I guess. At least he was. I thought of Jacob's angry, betrayed face and wondered what he was to me now. Alice nodded, seeming preoccupied. What? I don't know, she said. I'm not sure what it means. Well, I'm not dead, at least. She rolled her eyes. You was a fool to think you could survive alone. I've never seen anyone so prone to life-threatening idiocy. I survived, I pointed out. She was thinking of something else. So if the currents were too much for you, how did this Jacob manage? Jacob is strong. She heard the reluctance in my voice, and her eyebrows rose. I gnawed on my lip for a second. Was this a secret or not? And if it was, then who was my greatest allegiance to? Jacob or Alice? It was too hard to keep secrets, I decided. Jacob knew everything. Why not Alice too? See, well, he's sort of a werewolf, I admitted in a rush. The Quiutes turn into wolves when there are vampires around. They know Carlisle from a long time ago. Were you with Carlisle back then? Alice gawked at me for a moment, and then recovered herself, blinking rapidly. I guess that explains the smell, she muttered. But does it explain what I didn't see? She frowned, her porcelain forehead creasing. The smell? I repeated. You smell awful, she said absently, still frowning. A werewolf? You sure about that? Very sure, I promised, wincing as I remembered Paul and Jacob fighting in the road. I guess you went with Carlisle the last time there were werewolves here in Forks? No, I hadn't found him yet. Alice was still lost in thought. Suddenly her eyes widened, and she turned to stare at me with a shocked expression. Your best friend's a werewolf? I nodded sheepishly. How long's this been going on? Not long, I said, my voice sounding defensive. He's only been a werewolf for just a few weeks. She glowered at me. A young werewolf? Even worse. Edward was right. You're a magnet for danger. Weren't you supposed to be staying out of trouble? There's nothing wrong with werewolves, I grumbled, stung by her critical tone. Until they lose their tempers, she shook her head sharply from side to side. Leave it to you, Bella. Anyone else would be better off when the vampires left town, but you have to start hanging out with the first monsters you can find. I didn't want to argue with Alice. I was still trembling with joy that she was really, truly here. That I could touch her marble skin and hear her wind chime voice. But she had it all wrong. No, Alice, the vampires didn't really leave. Not all of them, anyway. That's the whole trouble. If it weren't for the werewolves, Victoria would have gotten me by now. Well, if it weren't for Jake and his friends, LaRon would have gotten me before she could, I guess, so... Victoria, she hissed. LaRon? I nodded, a teensy bit alarmed by the expression in her black eyes. I pointed at my chest. Danger magnet, remember? She shook her head again. Tell me everything. Start at the beginning. I glossed over the beginning, skipping the motorcycles and the voices, but telling her everything else, right up to today's misadventure. Alice didn't like my thin explanation about boredom and the cliffs, so I hurried on to the strange flame I'd seen on the water and what I thought it meant. Her eyes narrowed almost to slits at that part. It was strange to see her look so dangerous, like a vampire. I swallowed hard and went on with the rest about Harry. She listened to my story without interrupting. Occasionally, she would shake her head, and the crease in her forehead deepened until it looked like it was carved permanently into the marble of her skin. She didn't speak, and finally, I fell quiet, struck again by the borrowed grief at Harry's passing. I thought of Charlie. He would be home soon. What condition would he be in? Our leaving didn't do you any good at all, did it? Alice murmured. I laughed once. It was a slightly hysterical sound. That was never the point, though, was it? It's not like you left for my benefit. Alice scowled at the floor for a moment. Well, I guess I acted impulsively today. I probably shouldn't have intruded. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My stomach dropped. Don't go, Alice, I whispered. My fingers locked around the collar of her white shirt and I began to hyperventilate. Please don't leave me. Her eyes opened wider. All right, she said, enunciating each word with slow precision. I'm not going anywhere tonight. Take a deep breath. I tried to obey, though I couldn't quite locate my lungs. She watched my face while I concentrated on my breathing. She waited till I was calmer to comment. You look like hell, Bella. I drowned today, I reminded her. It goes deeper than that. You're a mess. I flinched. Look, I'm doing my best. What do you mean? It hasn't been easy. I'm working on it. She frowned. I told him, she said to herself. Alice, I sighed. What did you think you were going to find? I mean, besides me dead? Did you expect to find me skipping around and whistling show tunes? You know me better than that. I do, but I hoped. Then I guess I don't have the corner on the idiocy market. The phone rang. That has to be Charlie, I said, staggering to my feet. I grabbed Alice's stone hand and dragged her with me to the kitchen. I wasn't about to let her out of my sight. Charlie? I answered the phone. No, it's me, Jacob said. Jake? Alice scrutinized my expression. Just making sure you were still alive, Jacob said sourly. I'm fine. I told you that it wasn't... Yeah, I got it. Bye. Jacob hung up on me. I sighed and let my head hang back, staring at the ceiling. That's going to be a problem. Alice squeezed my hand. They aren't excited I'm here. Not especially. But it's none of their business anyway. Alice put her arm around me. So what do we do now? She mused. She seemed to talk to herself for a moment. Things to do. Loose ends to tie. What things to do? Her face was suddenly careful. I don't know for sure. I need to see Carlisle. Would she leave so soon? My stomach dropped. Could you stay? I begged. Please? For just a little while? I've missed you so much. My voice broke. If you think that's a good idea... Her eyes were unhappy. I do. You can stay here. Charlie would love that. I have a house, Bella. I nodded, disappointed but resigned. She hesitated, studying me. Well, I need to go get a suitcase of clothes, at the very least. I threw my arms around her. Alice, you're the best. And I think I need to hunt. Immediately, she added in a strained voice. Oh, oops. I took a step back. Can you stay out of trouble for 1 hour? She asked skeptically. Then before I could answer, she held up one finger and closed her eyes. Her face went smooth and blank for a few seconds. And then her eyes opened, and she answered her own question. Yes, you'll be fine. For tonight, anyway. She grimaced. Even making faces, she looked like an angel. You'll come back? I asked in a small voice. I promise. 1 hour. I glanced at the clock over the kitchen table. She laughed and leaned in quickly to kiss me on the cheek. Then she was gone. I took a deep breath. Alice would be back. I suddenly felt so much better. I had plenty to do to keep myself busy while I waited. A shower was definitely first on the agenda. I sniffed my shoulders as I undressed, but I couldn't smell anything but the brine and seaweed scent of the ocean. I wondered what Alice had meant about me smelling bad. When I was cleaned up, I went back to the kitchen. I couldn't see any signs that Charlie had eaten recently, and he would probably be hungry when he got back. I hummed tunelessly to myself as I moved around the kitchen. While Thursday's casserole rotated in the microwave, I made up the couch with sheets and an old pillow. Alice wouldn't need it, but Charlie would need to see it. I was careful not to watch the clock. There was no reason to start myself panicking. Alice had promised. I hurried through my dinner, not tasting it, just feeling the ache as it slid down my raw throat. Mostly I was thirsty. I must have drunk a half-gallon of water by the time I was finished. All the salt in my system had dehydrated me. I went to go try to watch TV while I waited. Alice was already there, sitting on her improvised bed. Her eyes were a liquid butterscotch. She smiled and patted the pillow. Thanks. You're early, I said, elated. I sat down next to her and leaned my head on her shoulder. She put her cold arms around me and sighed. Bella, what are we going to do with you? I don't know, I admitted. I really have been trying my hardest. I believe you. It was silent. Does he... I took a deep breath. It was harder to say his name out loud, even though I was able to think it now. Does Edward know you're here? I couldn't help asking. It was my pain, after all. I'd deal with it when she was gone, I promised myself, and felt sick at the thought. No. There was only one way that could be true. He's not with Carlisle and Esme? He checks in every few months. Oh. He must still be out, enjoying his distractions. I focused my curiosity on a safer topic. You said you flew here. Where did you come from? I was in Denali, visiting Tanya's family. Is Jasper here? Did he come with you? She shook her head. He didn't approve of my interfering. We promised. She trailed off and her tone changed. And you think Charlie won't mind me being here? She asked, sounding worried. Charlie thinks you're wonderful, Alice. Well, we're about to find out. Sure enough, a few seconds later I heard the cruiser pull into the driveway. I jumped up and hurried to the door. Charlie trudged slowly up the walk, his eyes on the ground and his shoulders slumped. I walked forward to meet him. He didn't even see me until I hugged him around the waist. He embraced me back fiercely. I'm so sorry about Harry, Dad. I'm really gonna miss him, Charlie mumbled. How's Sue doing? She seems dazed, like she hasn't grasped it yet. Sam's staying with her. The volume of his voice faded in and out. Those poor kids. Leah's just a year older than you, and Seth's only 14. He shook his head. He kept his arms tight around me as he started toward the door again. Dad, I figured I'd better warn him. You'll never guess who's here. He looked at me blankly. His head swiveled around and he spied the Mercedes across the street, the porch light reflecting off the glossy black paint. Before he could react, Alice was in the doorway. Hi, Charlie, she said in a subdued voice. I'm sorry I came at such a bad time. Alice Cullen? He peered at the slight figure in front of him as if he doubted what his eyes were telling him. Alice? Is that you? It's me, she confirmed. I was in the neighborhood. Is Carlisle? No, I'm alone. Both Alice and I knew he wasn't really asking about Carlisle. His arms tightened over my shoulder. She can stay here, can't she? I pleaded. I already asked her. Of course, Charlie said mechanically. We'd love to have you, Alice. Thank you, Charlie. I know it's horrid timing. No, it's fine, really. I'm going to be really busy doing what I can for Harry's family. It'll be nice for Bella to have some company. There's dinner for you on the table, Dad, I told him. Thanks, Belle. He gave me one more squeeze before he shuffled toward the kitchen. Alice went back to the couch and I followed her. This time, she was the one to pull me against her shoulder. You look tired. Yeah, I agreed and shrugged. Near-death experiences do that to me. So what does Carlisle think of you being here? He doesn't know. He and Esme are on a hunting trip. I'll hear from him in a few days when he gets back. You won't tell him, though, when he checks in again? I asked. She knew I didn't mean Carlisle now. No, he'd bite my head off, Alice said grimly. I laughed once and then sighed. I didn't want to sleep. I wanted to stay up all night talking to Alice. And it didn't make sense for me to be tired, what with crashing on Jacob's couch all day. But drowning really had taken a lot out of me. My eyes wouldn't stay open. I rested my head on her stone shoulder and drifted into a more peaceful oblivion than I had any hope of. I woke early from a deep and dreamless sleep, feeling well rested but stiff. I was on the couch tucked under the blankets I'd laid out for Alice, and I could hear her and Charlie talking in the kitchen. It sounded like Charlie was fixing her breakfast. "How bad was it, Charlie?" Alice asked softly, and at first I thought they were talking about the Clearwaters. Charlie sighed. "Real bad." "Tell me about it. I want to know exactly what happened when we left." There was a pause while the cupboard door was closed and a dial on the stove was clicked off. I waited, cringing. "I've never felt so helpless," Charlie began slowly. "I didn't know what to do. That first week, I thought I was going to have to hospitalize her. She wouldn't eat or drink. She wouldn't move. Dr. Gerendy was throwing around words like catatonic. I didn't let him up to see her. I was afraid it would scare her." "She snapped out of it, though?" "I had Renee come take her to Florida. I just didn't want to be the one, if she had to go to a hospital or something. I hoped being with her mother would help, but when we started packing her clothes, she woke up with a vengeance. I've never seen Bella throw a fit like that. She was never one for the tantrums, but boy did she fly into a fury. She threw her clothes everywhere and screamed that we couldn't make her leave, and then she finally started crying. I thought that would be the turning point. I didn't argue when she insisted on staying here, and she did seem to get better at first." Charlie trailed off. It was hard listening to this, knowing how much pain I'd caused him. "But," Alice prompted, "she went back to school and work. She ate and slept and did her homework. She answered when someone asked her a direct question, but she was empty. Her eyes were blank. There were lots of little things. She wouldn't listen to music anymore. Found a bunch of CDs broken in the trash. She didn't read. She wouldn't be in the same room when the TV was on. Not that she watched it so much before. I finally figured it out. She was avoiding everything that reminded her of him. We could hardly talk. I was so worried about something that would upset her. The littlest things would make her flinch. She never volunteered anything. She would just answer if I asked her something. She was alone all the time. She didn't call her friends back, and after a while they stopped calling. It was Night of the Living Dead around here. I still hear her screaming in her sleep. I could almost see him shuddering. I shuddered too, remembering, and then I sighed. I hadn't fooled him at all. Not for 1 second. "I'm so sorry, Charlie," Alice said, voice glum. "It's not your fault." The way he said it made it perfectly clear that he was holding someone responsible. "You were always a good friend to her." "She seems better now, though." "Yeah. Ever since she started hanging out with Jacob Black, I've noticed a real improvement. She has some color in her cheeks when she comes home, some light in her eyes. She's happier." He paused, and his voice was different when he spoke again. "He's a year or so younger than her, and I know she used to think of him as a friend, but I think maybe it's something more now. Or headed that direction, anyway." Charlie said this in a tone that was almost belligerent. It was a warning, not for Alice, but for her to pass along. Jake's old for his years, he continued, still sounding defensive. He's taken care of his father physically, the way Bella took care of her mother emotionally. It matured him. He's a good-looking kid, too. Takes after his mum's side. He's good for Bella, you know? Charlie insisted. Then it's good she has him, Alice agreed. Charlie sighed out a big gust of air, folding quickly to the lack of opposition. Okay, so I guess that's overstating things. I don't know. Even with Jacob, now and then I see something in her eyes. I wonder if I've ever grasped how much pain she's really in. It's not normal, Alice. And it frightens me. Not normal at all. Not like someone left her, but like someone died. His voice cracked. It was like someone had died. Like I had died. Because it had been more than just losing the truest of true loves. As if that were not enough to kill anyone. It was also losing a whole future, a whole family. The whole life that I had chosen. Charlie went on in a hopeless tone. I don't know if she's going to get over it. I'm not sure if it's in her nature to heal from something like this. She's always been such a constant little thing. She doesn't get past things. Change her mind. She's one of a kind, Alice agreed in a dry voice. And Alice? Charlie hesitated. Now, you know how fond I am of you. I can tell that she's happy to see you, but I'm a little worried about what your visit will do to her. So am I, Charlie. So am I. I wouldn't have come if I'd had any idea. I'm sorry. Don't apologize, honey. Who knows? Maybe it'll be good for her. I hope you're right. There was a long break while forks scraped plates and Charlie chewed. I wondered where Alice was hiding the food. Alice, I have to ask you something, Charlie said awkwardly. Alice was calm. Go ahead. He's not coming back to visit too, is he? I could hear the suppressed anger in Charlie's voice. Alice answered in a soft, reassuring tone. He doesn't even know I'm here. The last time I spoke with him, he was in South America. I stiffened as I heard this new information and listened harder. That's something at least, Charlie snorted. Well, I hope he's enjoying himself. For the first time, Alice's voice had a bit of steel in it. I wouldn't make assumptions, Charlie. I knew how her eyes would flash when she used that tone. A chair scooted from the table, scraping loudly across the floor. I pictured Charlie getting up. There was no way Alice would make that kind of noise. The faucet ran, splashing against a dish. It didn't sound like they were going to say anything more about Edward, so I decided it was time to wake up. I turned over, bouncing against the springs to make them squeak. Then I yawned loudly. All was quiet in the kitchen. I stretched and groaned. Alice? I asked innocently, the soreness rasping in my throat adding nicely to the charade. I'm in the kitchen, Bella, Alice called. No hint in her voice that she suspected my eavesdropping, but she was good at hiding things like that. Charlie had to leave then. He was helping Sue Clearwater with the funeral arrangements. It would have been a very long day without Alice. She never spoke about leaving, and I didn't ask her. I knew it was inevitable, but I put it out of my mind. Instead, we talked about her family, all but one. Carlisle was working nights in Ithaca, teaching part-time at Cornell. Esme was restoring a 17th century house, a historical monument in the forest north of the city. Emmett and Rosalie had gone to Europe for a few months on another honeymoon, but they were back now. Jasper was at Cornell too, studying philosophy this time. And Alice had been doing some personal research concerning the information I'd accidentally uncovered for her last spring. She'd successfully tracked down the asylum where she'd spent the last years of her human life. The life she had no memory of. My name was Mary Alice Brandon, she told me quietly. I had a little sister named Cynthia. Her daughter, my niece, is still alive in Biloxi. Did you find out why they put you in that place? What would drive parents to that extreme, even if their daughter saw visions of the future? She just shook her head, her topaz eyes thoughtful. I couldn't find much about them. I went through all the old newspapers on microfiche. My family wasn't mentioned often. They weren't part of the social circle that made the papers. My parents' engagement was there, and Cynthia's. The name fell uncertainly from her tongue. My birth was announced, and my death. I found my grave. I also filched my admission sheet from the old asylum archives. The date on the admission and the date on my tombstone are the same. I didn't know what to say. And after a short pause, Alice moved on to lighter topics. The Cullens were reassembled now, with the one exception, spending Cornell's spring break in Denali with Tanya and her family. I listened too eagerly to even the most trivial news. She never mentioned the one I was most interested in, and for that I was grateful. It was enough to listen to the stories of the family I'd once dreamed of belonging to. Charlie didn't get back until after dark, and he looked more worn than he had the night before. He would be headed back to the reservation first thing in the morning for Harry's funeral, so he turned in early. I stayed on the couch with Alice, again. Charlie was almost a stranger when he came down the stairs before the sun was up, wearing an old suit I'd never seen him in before. The jacket hung open. I guess it was too tight to fasten the buttons. His tie was a bit wide for the current style. He tiptoed to the door, trying not to wake us up. I let him go, pretending to sleep, as Alice did on the recliner. As soon as he was out of the door, Alice sat up. Under the quilt, she was fully dressed. "So what are we doing today?" she asked. "I don't know. Do you see anything interesting happening?" She smiled and shook her head. "But it's still early." All the time I'd been spending in the push meant a pile of things I'd been neglecting at home, and I decided to catch up on my chores. I wanted to do something, anything that might make life easier for Charlie. Maybe it would make him feel just a little better to come home to a clean, organized house. I started with the bathroom. It showed the most sign of neglect. While I worked, Alice leaned against the door jamb and asked nonchalant questions about our high school friends, what they had been up to since she'd left. Her face stayed casual and emotionless, but I sensed her disapproval when she realized how little I could tell her. Maybe I just had a guilty conscience after eavesdropping on her conversation with Charlie yesterday morning. I was literally up to my elbows in Comet, scrubbing the floor of the bathtub when the doorbell rang. I looked at Alice at once. Her expression was perplexed, almost worried, which was strange. Alice was never taken by surprise. "Hold on," I shouted in the general direction of the front door, getting up and hurrying to the sink to rinse my arms off. "Bella," Alice said with a trace of frustration in her voice. "I have a fairly good guess who that might be, and I think I'd better step out." "Guess," I echoed. Since when did Alice have to guess anything? If this is a repeat of my egregious lap in foresight yesterday, then it's most likely Jacob Black or one of his friends. I stared at her, putting it together. "You can't see werewolves?" She grimaced. "So it would seem." She was obviously annoyed by this fact. Very annoyed. The doorbell rang again, buzzing twice, quickly and impatiently. "You don't have to go anywhere, Alice. You were here first." She laughed her silvery little laugh. It had a dark edge. "Trust me, it wouldn't be a good idea to have me and Jacob Black in a room together." She kissed my cheek swiftly before she vanished through Charlie's door, and out his back window, no doubt. The doorbell rang again. I sprinted down the stairs and threw the door open. It was Jacob, of course. Even blind, Alice wasn't slow. He was standing about 6 feet back from the door, his nose wrinkled in distaste, but his face otherwise smooth, mask-like. He didn't fool me. I could see the faint trembling of his hands. Hostility rolled off of him in waves. It brought back that awful afternoon when he'd chosen Sam over me, and I felt my chin jerk up defensively in response. Jacob's rabbit idled by the curb with Jared behind the wheel and Embry in the passenger seat. I understood what this meant. They were afraid to let him come here alone. It made me sad and a little annoyed. The Cullens weren't like that. "Hey," I finally said when he didn't speak. Jake pursed his lips, still hanging back from the door. His eyes flickered across the front of the house. I ground my teeth. "She's not here. Do you need something?" He hesitated. "You're alone?" "Yes," I sighed. "Can I talk to you a minute?" "Of course you can, Jacob. Come on in." Jacob glanced over his shoulder at his friends in the car. I saw Embry shake his head just a tiny bit. For some reason, this bugged me no end. My teeth clenched together again. "Chicken," I mumbled under my breath. Jake's eyes flashed back to me, his thick black brows pushing into a furious angle over his deep-set eyes. His jaw set, and he marched. There was no other way to describe the way he moved. Up the sidewalk and shrugged past me into the house. I locked gazes with first Jared and then Embry. I didn't like the hard way they eyed me. Did they really think I would let anything hurt Jacob? I shut the door on them. Jacob was in the hall behind me, staring at the mess of blankets in the living room. "Slumber party?" he asked, his tone sarcastic. "Yeah," I answered, with the same level of acid. I didn't like Jacob when he acted this way. "What's it to you?" He wrinkled his nose again, like he smelled something unpleasant. "Where's your friend?" I could hear the quotation marks in his tone. "She had errands to run. Look, Jacob, what do you want?" Something about the room seemed to make him edgier. His long arms were quivering. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he moved to the kitchen, his restless eyes darting everywhere. I followed him. He paced back and forth along the short counter. "Hey," I said, putting myself in his way. He stopped pacing and stared down at me. "What's your problem?" "I don't like having to be here." That stung. I winced and his eyes tightened. "Then I'm sorry you had to come," I muttered. "Why don't you tell me what you need, so you can leave?" "I just have to ask you a couple of questions. Shouldn't take long. We have to get back for the funeral." "Okay. Get it over with then." I was probably overdoing it with the antagonism, but I didn't want him to see how much this hurt. I knew I wasn't being fair. After all, I'd picked the bloodsucker over him last night. I'd hurt him first. He took a deep breath, and his trembling fingers were suddenly still, his face smoothed into a serene mask. "One of the Cullens is staying here with you," he stated. "Yes, Alice Cullen." He nodded thoughtfully. How long is she here for? As long as she wants to be. The belligerence was still there in my tone. It's an open invitation. Do you think you could please explain to her about the other one? Victoria? I paled. I told her about that. He nodded. You should know, we can only watch our own lands with a Cullen here. You'll only be safe in the push. I can't protect you here anymore. Okay, I said in a small voice. He looked away then, out the back windows. He didn't continue. Is that all? He kept his eyes on the glass as he answered. Just one more thing. I waited, but he didn't continue. Yes, I finally prompted. Are the rest of them coming back now? He asked in a cool, quiet voice. It reminded me of Sam's always calm manner. Jacob was becoming more like Sam. I wondered why that bothered me so much. Now I didn't speak. He looked back at my face with probing eyes. Well, he asked. He struggled to conceal the tension behind his serene expression. No, I said finally, grudgingly. They aren't coming back. His expression didn't change. Okay. That's all. I glared at him, annoyance rekindled. Well, run along now. Go tell Sam that the scary monsters aren't coming to get you. Okay, he repeated, still calm. That seemed to be it. Jacob walked swiftly from the kitchen. I waited to hear the front door open, but I heard nothing. I could hear the clock over the stove ticking, and I marveled again at how quiet he'd become. What a disaster. How could I have alienated him so completely in such a short amount of time? Would he forgive me when Alice was gone? What if he didn't? I slumped against the counter and buried my face in my hands. How had I made such a mess of everything? But what could I have done differently? Even in hindsight, I couldn't think of any better way, any perfect course of action. Bella? Jacob asked in a troubled voice. I pulled my face out of my hands to see Jacob hesitating in the kitchen doorway. He hadn't left when I'd thought. It was only when I saw the clear drops sparkling in my hands that I realized I was crying. Jacob's calm expression was gone. His face was anxious and unsure. He walked quickly back to stand in front of me, ducking his head so his eyes were closer to being on the same level with mine. Did it again, didn't I? Did what? I asked, my voice cracking. Broke my promise? Sorry. It's okay, I mumbled. I started it this time. His face twisted. I knew how you felt about them. It shouldn't have taken me by surprise like that. I could see the revulsion in his eyes. I wanted to explain to him what Alice was really like, to defend her against the judgments he had made, but something warned me that now was not the time. So I just said, sorry, again. Let's not worry about it, okay? She's just visiting, right? She'll leave. Things will go back to normal. Can't I be friends with you both at the same time? My voice not hiding an ounce of the hurt I felt. He shook his head slowly. No, I don't think you can. I sniffed and stared at his big feet. But you'll wait, right? You'll still be my friend? Even though I love Alice too? I didn't look up, afraid to see what he'd think of that last part. It took him a minute to answer, so I was probably right not to look. Yeah, I'll always be your friend, he said gruffly. No matter what you love. Promise? Promise. I felt his arms wind around me and I leaned against his chest, still sniffling. This sucks. Yeah. He sniffed my hair and said, "Oh." What? I demanded. I looked up to see his nose was wrinkled again. Why does everyone keep doing that to me? I don't smell. He smiled a little. Yeah, you do. You smell like them. Ugh. Too sweet. Sickly sweet. And icy. Burns my nose. Really? That was strange. Alice smelled unbelievably wonderful. To a human, anyway. But why would Alice think I smelled too, then? That wiped his smile away. Huh. Maybe I don't smell so good to her either, huh? Well, you both smell fine to me. I rested my head against him again. I was going to miss him terribly when he walked out my door. It was a nasty catch-22. On the one hand, I wanted Alice to stay forever. I was going to die, metaphorically, when she left me. But how was I supposed to go without seeing Jake for any length of time? What a mess, I thought again. I'll miss you, Jacob whispered, echoing my thoughts. Every minute. I hope she leaves soon. It really doesn't have to be that way, Jake. He sighed. Yeah, it really does, Bella. You love her, so I'd better not get anywhere near her. I'm not sure that I'm even tempered enough to handle that. Sam would be mad if I broke the treaty, and his voice turned sarcastic. You probably wouldn't like it too much if I killed your friend. I recoiled from him when he said that, but he only tightened his arms, refusing to let me escape. There's no point in avoiding the truth. It's the way things are, Bells. I do not like the way things are. Jacob freed one arm so that he could cup his big brown hand under my chin and make me look at him. Yeah. It was easier when we were both human, wasn't it? I sighed. We stared at each other for a long moment. His hand smoldered against my skin. In my face, I knew there was nothing but wistful sadness. I didn't want to have to say goodbye now, no matter for how short a time. At first, his face reflected mine, but then, as neither of us looked away, his expression changed. He released me, lifting his other hand to brush his fingertip along my cheek, trailing them down to my jaw. I could feel his fingers tremble, not with anger this time. He pressed his palm against my cheek so that my face was trapped between his burning hands. Bella, he whispered. I was frozen. No, I hadn't made this decision yet. I didn't know if I could do this, and now I was out of time to think. But I would have been a fool if I thought rejecting him now would have no consequences. I stared back at him. He was not my Jacob, but he could be. His face was familiar and beloved. In so many real ways, I did love him. He was my comfort, my safe harbor. Right now, I could choose to have him belong to me. Alice was back for the moment, but that changed nothing. True love was forever lost. The prince was never coming back to kiss me awake from my enchanted sleep. I was not a princess after all. So what was the fairy tale protocol for other kisses? The mundane kind that didn't break any spells? Maybe it would be easy, like holding his hand or having his arms around me. Maybe it would feel nice. Maybe it wouldn't feel like a betrayal. Besides, who was I betraying anyway? Just myself. keeping his eyes on mine, Jacob began to bend his face toward me, and I was still absolutely undecided. The shrill ring of the phone made us both jump, but it did not break his focus. He took his hand from under my chin and reached over me to grab the receiver, but still held my face securely with the hand against my cheek. His dark eyes did not free mine. I was too muddled to react, even to take advantage of the distraction. "Swan Residence," Jacob said, his husky voice low and intense. Someone answered, and Jacob altered in an instant. He straightened up and his hand dropped from my face. His eyes went flat, his face blank, and I would have bet the measly remainder of my college fund that it was Alice. I recovered myself and held out my hand for the phone. Jacob ignored me. "He's not here," Jacob said, and the words were menacing. There was some very short reply, a request for more information it seemed, because he added unwillingly, "He's at the funeral." Then Jacob hung up the phone. "Filthy bloodsucker," he muttered under his breath. The face he turned back to me was the bitter mask again. "Who did you just hang up on?" I gasped, infuriated. "In my house, and on my phone." "Easy. He hung up on me." "He? Who was it?" He sneered the title. Dr. Carlyle Cullen. "Why didn't you let me talk to him?" "He didn't ask for you," Jacob said coldly. His face was smooth, expressionless, but his hand shook. "He asked where Charlie was, and I told him. I don't think I broke any rules of etiquette." "You listen to me, Jacob Black." But he obviously wasn't listening. He looked quickly over his shoulder as if someone had called his name from the other room. His eyes went wide and his body stiff. Then he started trembling. I listened too, automatically, but heard nothing. "Bye, Bells," he spit out and wheeled toward the front door. I ran after him. "What is it?" And then I ran into him as he rocked back on his heels, cussing under his breath. He spun around again, knocking me sideways. I bobbled and fell to the floor, my legs tangled with his. "Shoot!" I protested as he hurriedly jerked his legs free one at a time. "Ow!" I struggled to pull myself up as he darted for the back door. He suddenly froze again. Alice stood motionless at the foot of the stairs. "Bella?" she choked. I scrambled to my feet and lurched to her side. Her eyes were dazed and far away, her face drawn and whiter than bone. Her slim body trembled to an inner turmoil. "Alice, what's wrong?" I cried. I put my hands on her face, trying to calm her. Her eyes focused on mine abruptly, wide with pain. "Edward," was all she whispered. My body reacted faster than my mind was able to catch up with the implications of her reply. I didn't at first understand why the room was spinning, or where the hollow roar in my ears was coming from. My mind labored, unable to make sense of Alice's bleak face and how it could possibly relate to Edward, while my body was already swaying, seeking the relief of unconsciousness before the reality could hit me. The stairway tilted at the oddest angle. Jacob's furious voice was suddenly in my ear, hissing out a stream of profanities. I felt a vague disapproval. His new friends were clearly a bad influence. I was on the couch without understanding how I got there, and Jacob was still swearing. It felt like there was an earthquake. The couch was shaking under me. "What did you do to her?" he demanded. Alice ignored him. "Bella? Bella, snap out of it. We have to hurry." "Stay back," Jacob warned. "Calm down, Jacob Black," Alice ordered. "You don't want to do that so close to her." I don't think I'll have a problem keeping my focus, he retorted, but his voice sounded a little cooler. Alice? My voice was weak. What happened? I asked, even though I didn't want to hear. I don't know, she suddenly wailed. What is he thinking? I labored to pull myself up despite the dizziness. I realized it was Jacob's arm I was gripping for balance. He was the one shaking, not the couch. Alice was pulling a small silver phone from her bag when my eyes relocated her. Her fingers dialed the numbers so fast they were a blur. Rose, I need to talk to Carlisle, now. Her voice whipped through the words. Fine, as soon as he's back. No, I'll be on a plane. Look, have you heard anything from Edward? Alice paused now, listening with an expression that grew more appalled every second. Her mouth opened into a little O of horror, and the phone shook in her hand. Why? She gasped. Why would you do that, Rosalie? Whatever the answer was, it made her jaw tighten in anger. Her eyes flashed and narrowed. Well, you're wrong on both counts though, Rosalie. So that would be a problem, don't you think? She asked acidly. Yes, that's right. She's absolutely fine. I was wrong. It's a long story. But you're wrong about that part too. That's why I'm calling. Yes, that's exactly what I saw. Alice's voice was very hard and her lips were pulled back from her teeth. It's a bit late for that, Rose. Save your remorse for someone who believes it. Alice snapped the phone shut with a sharp twist of her fingers. Her eyes were tortured as she turned to face me. Alice, I blurted out quickly. I couldn't let her speak yet. I needed a few more seconds before she spoke, and her words destroyed what was left of my life. Alice, Carlisle is back. He called just before. She stared at me blankly. How long ago? She asked in a hollow voice. Half a minute before you showed up. What did he say? She really focused now, waiting for my answer. I didn't talk to him. My eyes flickered to Jacob. Alice turned her penetrating gaze on him. He flinched, but held his place next to me. He sat awkwardly, almost as if he were trying to shield me with his body. He asked for Charlie. I told him Charlie wasn't here. Jacob muttered resentfully. Is that everything? Alice demanded, her voice like ice. Then he hung up on me, Jacob spit back. A tremor rolled down his spine, shaking me with it. You told him Charlie was at the funeral, I reminded him. Alice jerked her head back toward me. What were his exact words? He said, he's not here. And when Carlisle asked where Charlie was, Jacob said, at the funeral. Alice moaned and sank to her knees. Tell me, Alice, I whispered. That wasn't Carlisle on the phone, she said hopelessly. Are you calling me a liar? Jacob snarled from beside me. Alice ignored him, focusing on my bewildered face. It was Edward. The words were just a choked whisper. He thinks you're dead. My mind started to work again. These words weren't the ones I'd been afraid of, and the relief cleared my head. Rosalie told him I killed myself, didn't she? I said, sighing as I relaxed. Yes, Alice admitted, her eyes flashing hard again. In her defense, she did believe it. They rely on my sight far too much for something that works so imperfectly. But for her to track him down to tell him this, didn't she realize or care? Her voice faded away in horror. And when Edward called here, he thought Jacob meant my funeral, I realized. It stung to know how close I'd been, inches away from his voice. My nails dug into Jacob's arm, but he didn't flinch. Alice looked at me strangely. "You're not upset?" she whispered. "Well, it's really rotten timing, but it'll all get straightened out the next time he calls. Someone will tell him what, really..." I trailed off. Her gaze strangled the words in my throat. Why was she so panicked? Why was her face twisting now with pity and horror? What was it she had said to Rosalie on the phone just now? Something about what she had seen. Rosalie's remorse. Rosalie would never feel remorse for anything that happened to me, but if she'd hurt her family, hurt her brother... "Bella," Alice whispered. "Edward won't call again. He believed her." "I don't understand." My mouth framed each word in silence. I couldn't push the air out to actually say the words that would make her explain what that meant. "He's going to Italy." It took the length of one heartbeat for me to comprehend. When Edward's voice came back to me now, it was not the perfect imitation of my delusions. It was just the weak, flat tone of my memories. But the words alone were enough to shred through my chest and leave it gaping open. Words from a time when I would have bet everything that I owned or could borrow on that fact that he loved me. "Well, I wasn't going to live without you," he'd said as we watched Romeo and Juliet die, here in this very room. But I wasn't sure how to do it. I knew Emma and Jasper would never help. So I was thinking maybe I would go to Italy and do something to provoke the Volturi. You don't irritate them, not unless you want to die. Not unless you want to die. No. The half-shrieked denial was so loud after the whispered words it made us all jump. I felt the blood rushing to my face as I realized what she'd seen. No, he can't. He can't do that. He made up his mind as soon as your friend confirmed that it was too late to save you. But he left. He didn't want me anymore. What difference does it make now? He knew I would die sometime. I don't think he ever planned to outlive you by long, Alice said quietly. How dare he? I screamed. I was on my feet now, and Jacob rose uncertainly to put himself between Alice and me again. Oh, get out of my way, Jacob. I elbowed my way around his trembling body with desperate impatience. What do we do? I begged Alice. There had to be something. Can't we call him? Can Carlyle? She was shaking her head. That was the first thing I tried. He left his phone in a trash can in Rio. Someone answered it, she whispered. You said before we had to hurry. Hurry how? Let's do it, whatever it is. Bella, I don't think I can ask you to... She trailed off in indecision. Ask me, I commanded. She put her hands on my shoulders, holding me in place, her fingers flexing sporadically to emphasize her words. We may already be too late. I saw him going to the Volturi and asking to die. We both cringed and my eyes were suddenly blind. I blinked feverishly at the tears. It all depends on what they choose. I can't see that till they make a decision. But if they say no, and they might, Arrow is fond of Carlyle and wouldn't want to offend him. Edward has a backup plan. They're very protective of their city. If Edward does something to upset the peace, he thinks they'll act to stop him. And he's right, they will. I stared at her with my jaw clenched in frustration. I'd heard nothing yet that would explain why we were still standing here. So if they agree to grant his favor, we're too late. If they say no, and he comes up with a plan to offend them quickly enough, we're too late. If he gives in to his more theatrical tendencies, we might have time. Let's go. Listen, Bella. Whether we are in time or not, we will be in the heart of the Volturi city. I will be considered his accomplice if he is successful. You will be a human who not only knows too much, but also smells too good. There's a very good chance that they will eliminate us all. Though in your case, it won't be punishment so much as dinner time. This is what's keeping us here? I asked in disbelief. I'll go alone if you're afraid. I mentally tabulated what money was left in my account and wondered if Alice would lend me the rest. I'm only afraid of getting you killed. I snorted in disgust. I almost get myself killed on a daily basis. Tell me what I need to do. You write a note to Charlie. I'll call the airlines. Charlie, I gasped. Not that my presence was protecting him, but could I leave him alone, here to face? I'm not going to let anything happen to Charlie. Jacob's low voice was gruff and angry. Screw the treaty. I glanced up at him, and he scowled at my panicked expression. Hurry, Bella, Alice interrupted urgently. I ran to the kitchen, yanking the drawers open and throwing the contents all over the floor as I searched for a pen. A smooth brown hand held one out to me. Thanks, I mumbled, pulling the cap off with my teeth. He silently handed me the pad of paper that we wrote phone messages on. I tore off the top sheet and threw it over my shoulder. Dad, I wrote. I'm with Alice. Edward's in trouble. You can ground me when I get back. I know it's a bad time. So sorry. Love you so much, Bella. Don't go, Jacob whispered. The anger was all gone now that Alice was out of sight. I wasn't about to waste time arguing with him. Please, please, please take care of Charlie, I said, as I dashed back out to the front room. Alice was waiting in the doorway with a bag over her shoulder. Get your wallet. You'll need ID. Please tell me you have a passport. I don't have time to forge one. I nodded and raced upstairs, my knees weak with gratitude that my mother had wanted to marry Phil on a beach in Mexico. Of course, like all her plans, it had fallen through, but not before I'd made all the practical arrangements I could for her. I tore through my room. I stuffed my old wallet, a clean t-shirt and sweatpants into my backpack, and then threw my toothbrush on top. I hurled myself back down the stairs. The sense of déjà vu was nearly stifling by this point. At least, unlike the last time, when I'd run away from Forks to escape thirsty vampires rather than to find them, I wouldn't have to say goodbye to Charlie in person. Jacob and Alice were locked in some kind of confrontation in front of the open door. Standing so far apart you wouldn't assume at first that they were having a conversation. Neither one seemed to notice my noisy reappearance. You might control yourself on occasion, but these leeches you're taking her to? Jacob was furiously accusing her. Yes, you're right, dog. Alice was snarling too. The Volturi are the very essence of our kind. They're the reason your hair stands on end when you smell me. They are the substance of your nightmares. The dread behind your instincts. I'm not unaware of that. And you take her to them, like a bottle of wine for a party, he shouted. You think she'd be better off if I left her here alone, with Victoria stalking her? We can handle the redhead. Then why is she still hunting? Jacob growled and a shudder rippled through his torso. Stop that, I shouted at them both, wild with impatience. Argue when we get back. Let's go. Alice turned for the car, disappearing in her haste. I hurried after her, pausing automatically to turn and lock the door. Jacob caught my arm with a shivering hand. Please, Bella. I'm begging. His dark eyes were glistening with tears. A lump filled my throat. Jake, I have to. You don't know. You really don't. You could stay here with me. You could stay alive. For Charlie. For me. The engine of Carlisle's Mercedes purred. The rhythm of the thrumming spiked when Alice revved it impatiently. I shook my head, tears spattering from my eyes with the sharp motion. I pulled my arm free, and he didn't fight me. Don't die, Bella, he choked out. Don't go, don't. What if I never saw him again? The thought pushed me past the silent tears. A sob broke out from my chest. I threw my arms around his waist and hugged for one too short moment, burying my tear-wet face against his chest. He put his big hand on the back of my hair as if to hold me there. Bye, Jake. I pulled his hand from my hair and kissed his palm. I couldn't bear to look at his face. Sorry, I whispered. Then I spun and raced for the car. The door on the passenger side was open and waiting. I threw my backpack over the headrest and slid in, slamming the door behind me. Take care of Charlie. I turned to shout out the window, but Jacob was nowhere in sight. As Alice stomped on the gas, and with the tires screeching like human screams, spun us round to face the road, I caught sight of a shred of white near the edge of the trees. A piece of a shoe. We made our flight with seconds to spare, and then the true torture began. The plane sat idle on the tarmac, while the flight attendants strolled so casually up and down the aisle, patting the bags in the overhead compartments to make sure everything fit. The pilots leaned out of the cockpit, chatting with them as they passed. Alice's hand was hard on my shoulder, holding me in my seat while I bounced anxiously up and down. It's faster than running, she reminded me in a low voice. I just nodded, in time with my bouncing. At last the plane rolled lazily from the gate, building speed with a gradual steadiness that tortured me further. I expected some kind of relief when we achieved liftoff, but my frenzied impatience didn't lessen. Alice lifted the phone on the back of the seat in front of her before we'd stopped climbing, turning her back on the stewardess who eyed her with disapproval. Something about my expressions stopped the stewardess from coming over to protest. I tried to tune out what Alice was murmuring to Jasper. I didn't want to hear the words again, but some slipped through. I can't be sure. I keep seeing him do different things. He keeps changing his mind. A killing spree through the city, attacking the guard, lifting a car over his head in the main square. Mostly things that would expose them. He knows that's the fastest way to force a reaction. No, you can't. Alice's voice dropped till it was nearly inaudible, though I was sitting inches from her. Contrarily, I listened harder. Tell Emmett no. Well, go after Emmett and Rosalie and bring them back. Think about it, Jasper. If he sees any of us, what do you think he'll do? She nodded. Exactly. I think Bella is the only chance, if there is a chance. I'll do everything that can be done, but prepare, Carlisle. The odds aren't good. She laughed then, and there was a catch in her voice. I've thought of that. Yes, I promise. Her voice became pleading. Don't follow me. I promise, Jasper. One way or another, I'll get out. And I love you. She hung up and leaned back in her seat with her eyes closed. I hate lying to him. Tell me everything, Alice, I begged. I don't understand. Why did you tell Jasper to stop Emmett? Why can't they come help us? 2 reasons, she whispered, her eyes still closed. The first, I told him, we could try to stop Edward ourselves. If Emmett could get his hands on him, we might be able to stop him long enough to convince him you're alive. But we can't sneak up on Edward. And if he sees us coming for him, he'll just act that much faster. He'll throw a Buick through a wall or something, and the Volturi will take him down. That's the second reason, of course. The reason I couldn't say to Jasper. Because if they're there, and the Volturi kill Edward, they'll fight them, Bella. She opened her eyes and stared at me, beseeching. If there were any chance we could win, if there were a way that the 4 of us could save my brother by fighting for him, maybe it would be different. But we can't. And Bella, I can't lose Jasper like that. I realized why her eyes begged for my understanding. She was protecting Jasper at our expense, and maybe at Edward's too. I understood, and I did not think badly of her. I nodded. Couldn't Edward hear you, though? I asked. Wouldn't we know, as soon as he heard your thoughts, that I was alive, that there was no point to this? Not that there was any justification either way. I still couldn't believe he was capable of reacting like this. It made no sense. I remembered with painful clarity his words that day on the sofa while we watched Romeo and Juliet kill themselves, one after the other. I wasn't going to live without you, he had said, as if it should be such an obvious conclusion. But the words he had spoken in the forest as he had left me had cancelled all that out, forcefully. If he were listening, she explained. But believe it or not, it's possible to lie with your thoughts. If you had died, I would still try to stop him. And I would be thinking, she's alive, as hard as I could. He knows that. I ground my teeth in mute frustration. If there were any way to do this without you, Bella, I wouldn't be endangering you like this. It's very wrong of me. Don't be stupid. I'm the last thing you should be worrying about. I shook my head impatiently. Tell me what you meant about hating to lie to Jasper. She smiled a grim smile. I promised him I would get out before they killed me too. It's not something I can guarantee, not by a long shot. She raised her eyebrows, as if willing me to take the danger more seriously. Who are these Volturi? I demanded in a whisper. What makes them so much more dangerous than Emmett, Jasper, Rosalie, and you? It was hard to imagine something scarier than that. She took a deep breath, and then abruptly leveled a dark glance over my shoulder. I turned in time to see the man in the aisle seat looking away as if he wasn't listening to us. He appeared to be a businessman, in a dark suit, with a power tie and a laptop on his knees. While I stared at him with irritation, he opened the computer and very conspicuously put headphones on. I leaned closer to Alice. Her lips were at my ears as she breathed the story. I was surprised that you recognized the name, she said. That you understood so immediately what it meant when I said he was going to Italy. I thought I would have to explain. How much did Edward tell you? He just said they were an old, powerful family, like royalty. That you didn't antagonize them unless you wanted to die. I whispered. The last word was hard to choke out. You have to understand, she said, her voice slower, more measured now. We Cullens are unique in more ways than you know. It's abnormal for so many of us to live together in peace. It's the same for Tanya's family in the north. And Carlyle speculates that abstaining makes it easier for us to be civilized, to form bonds based on love rather than survival or convenience. Even James's little coven of 3 was unusually large, and you saw how easily Laurent left them. Our kind travel alone, or in pairs as a general rule. Carlyle's family is the biggest in existence, as far as I know, with one exception, the Volturi. There were 3 of them originally, Ara, Caius, and Marcus. I've seen them, I mumbled, in the picture in Carlyle's study. Alice nodded. 2 females joined them over time, and the 5 of them make up the family. Not sure, but I suspect that their age is what gives them the ability to live peacefully together. They are well over 3,000 years old. Or maybe it's their gifts that give them extra tolerance. Like Edward and I, Ara and Marcus are talented. She continued before I could ask. Or maybe it's just their love of power that binds them together. Royalty is an apt description. But if there are only 5 that make up the family, she corrected, that doesn't include their god. I took a deep breath. That sounds serious. Oh, it is, she assured me. There were 9 members of the guard that were permanent, the last we heard. Others are more transitory. It changes, and many of them are gifted as well, with formidable gifts. Gifts that make what I can do look like a parlor trick. The Volturi choose them for their abilities, physical or otherwise. I opened my mouth and then closed it. I didn't think I wanted to know how bad the odds were. She nodded again as if she understood exactly what I was thinking. They don't get into too many confrontations. No one is stupid enough to mess with them. They stay in their city, leaving only as duty calls. Duty, I wondered. Didn't Edward tell you what they do? No, I said, feeling the blank expression on my face. Alice looked over my head again toward the businessman and put her wintry lips back to my ear. There's a reason he called them royalty. The ruling class. Over the millennia, they have assumed the position of enforcing our rules, which actually translates to punishing transgressors. They fulfill that duty decisively. My eyes popped wide with a shock. There are rules? I asked in a voice that was too loud. Shh. Shouldn't somebody have mentioned this to me earlier? I whispered angrily. I mean, I wanted to be one of you. Shouldn't somebody have explained the rules to me? Alice chuckled once at my reaction. It's not that complicated, Bella. There's only one core restriction, and if you think about it, you can probably figure it out for yourself. I thought about it. Nope, I have no idea. She shook her head, disappointed. Maybe it's too obvious. We just have to keep our existence a secret. Oh, I mumbled. It was obvious. It makes sense, and most of us don't need policing, she continued. But after a few centuries, sometimes one of us gets bored, or crazy, I don't know. And then the Volturi step in before it can compromise them or the rest of us. So Edward is planning to flout that in their own city, the city they've secretly held for 3,000 years, since the time of the Etruscans. They are so protective of their city that they don't allow hunting within its walls. Volterra is probably the safest city in the world, From vampire attack, at the very least. But you said they didn't leave. How do they eat? They don't leave. They bring in their food from the outside, from quite far away sometimes. It gives their guards something to do when they're not out annihilating mavericks or protecting Volterra from exposure. From situations like this one, like Edward, I finished her sentence. It was amazingly easy to say his name now. I wasn't sure what the difference was. Maybe because I wasn't really planning on living much longer without seeing him, or at all, if we were too late. It was comforting to know that I would have an easy way out. I doubt they've ever had a situation quite like this, she muttered, disgusted. You don't get a lot of suicidal vampires. The sound that escaped out of my mouth was very quiet, but Alice seemed to understand that it was a cry of pain. She wrapped her thin, strong arm round my shoulders. We'll do what we can, Bella. It's not over yet. Not yet. I let her comfort me, though I knew she thought our chances were poor. And the Volturi will get us if we mess up. Alice stiffened. You say that like it's a good thing. I shrugged. Knock it off, Bella, or we're turning around in New York and going back to Forks. What? You know what? If we're too late for Edward, I'm going to do my damnedest to get you back to Charlie. And I don't want any trouble from you. Do you understand that? Sure, Alice. She pulled back slightly so she could glare at me. No trouble. Scout's honor, I muttered. She rolled her eyes. Let me concentrate now. I'm trying to see what he's planning. She left her arm around me, but let her head fall back against the seat and closed her eyes. She pressed her free hand to the side of her face, rubbing her fingertips against her temple. I watched her in fascination for a long time. Eventually she became utterly motionless, her face like a stone sculpture. The minutes passed, and if I didn't know better I would have thought she'd fallen asleep. I didn't dare interrupt her to ask what was going on. I wished there was something safe for me to think about. I couldn't allow myself to consider the horrors we were headed toward, or more horrific yet, the chance that we might fail, not if I wanted to keep from screaming aloud. I couldn't anticipate anything either. Maybe if I were very, very, very lucky, I would somehow be able to save Edward. But I wasn't so stupid as to think that saving him would mean that I could stay with him. I was no different, no more special than I'd been before. There would be no new reason for him to want me now. Seeing him and losing him again, I fought back against the pain. This was the price I had to pay to save his life. I would pay it. They showed a movie, and my neighbor got headphones. Sometimes I watched the figures moving across the little screen, but couldn't even tell if the movie was supposed to be romance or a horror film. After an eternity, the plane began to descend toward New York City. Alice remained in her trance. I dithered, reaching out to touch her, only to pull my hand back again. This happened a dozen times, before the plane touched down, with jarring impact. Alice, I finally said. Alice, we have to go. I touched her arm. Her eyes came open very slowly. She shook her head from side to side for a moment. Anything new? I asked in a low voice, conscious of the man listening on the other side of me. Not exactly, she breathed in a voice I could barely catch. He's getting closer. He's deciding how he's going to ask. We had to run for our connection, but that was good. Better than having to wait. As soon as the plane was in the air, Alice closed her eyes and slid back into the same stupor as before. I waited as patiently as I could. When it was dark again, I opened the window to stare out into the flat black that was no better than the window shade. I was grateful that I'd had so many months' practice with controlling my thoughts. Instead of dwelling on the terrifying possibility that, no matter what Alice said, I did not intend to survive, I concentrated on lesser problems. Like, what was I going to say to Charlie if I got back? That was a thorny enough problem to occupy several hours. And Jacob? He'd promised to wait for me, but did that promise still apply? Would I end up home alone in Forks with no one at all? Maybe I didn't want to survive, no matter what happened. It felt like seconds later when Alice shook my shoulder. I hadn't realized I'd fallen asleep. "Bella," she hissed, her voice a little too loud in the darkened cabin full of sleeping humans. I wasn't disoriented. I hadn't been out long enough for that. "What's wrong?" Alice's eyes gleamed in the dim light of a reading lamp in the row behind us. "It's not wrong," she smiled fiercely. "It's right. They're deliberating, but they've decided to tell him no." "The Volturi?" I muttered, groggy. "Of course, Bella, keep up. I can see what they're going to say. Tell me." An attendant tiptoed down the aisle to us. "Can I get you ladies a pillow?" His hushed whisper was a rebuke to our comparatively loud conversation. "No, thank you." Alice beamed up at him, her smile shockingly lovely. The attendant's expression was dazed as he turned and stumbled his way back. "Tell me," I breathed almost silently. She whispered into my ear. "They're interested in him. They think his talent could be useful. They're going to offer him a place with them." "What will he say?" "I can't see that yet, but I'll bet it's colourful." She grinned again. "This is the first good news, the first break. They're intrigued. They truly don't want to destroy him. Wasteful. That's the word Ara will use. And that may be enough to force him to get creative. The longer he spends on his plans, the better for us." It wasn't enough to make me hopeful, to make me feel the relief she obviously felt. There were still so many ways that we could be too late. And if I didn't get through the walls into the Volturi city, I wouldn't be able to stop Alice from dragging me back home. "Alice? What? I'm confused. How are you seeing this so clearly? And then other times you see things far away, things that don't happen." Her eyes tightened. I wondered if she guessed what I was thinking of. "It's clear because it's immediate and close, and I'm really concentrating. The faraway things that come on their own, those are just glimpses, faint maybes. Plus, I see my kind more easily than yours. Edward's even easier because I'm so attuned to him." "You see me sometimes," I reminded her. She shook her head. "Not as clearly." I sighed. "I really wish you could have been right about me. In the beginning, when you first saw things about me, before we even met." "What do you mean?" "You saw me become one of you." I barely mouthed the words. She sighed. "It was a possibility at the time." "At the time," I repeated. "Actually, Bella..." She hesitated, and then seemed to make a choice. "Honestly, I think it's all gotten beyond ridiculous. I'm debating whether to just change you myself. I stared at her, frozen with shock. Instantly, my mind resisted her words. I couldn't afford that kind of hope if she changed her mind. Did I scare you? She wondered. I thought that's what you wanted. I do, I gasped. Alice, do it now. I could help you so much and I wouldn't slow you down. Bite me. Shh, she cautioned. The attendant was looking in our direction again. Try to be reasonable, she whispered. We don't have enough time. We have to get into Volterra tomorrow. You'd be writhing in pain for days. She made a face. And I don't think the other passengers would react well. I bit my lip. If you don't do it now, you'll change your mind. No, she frowned, her expression unhappy. I don't think I will. He'll be furious, but what will he be able to do about it? My heart beat faster. Nothing at all. She laughed quietly, and then sighed. You have too much faith in me, Bella. I'm not sure that I can. I'll probably just end up killing you. I'll take my chances. You are so bizarre, even for a human. Thanks. Oh well, this is purely hypothetical at this point anyway. First, we have to live through tomorrow. Good point. But at least I had something to hope for if we did. If Alice made good on her promise, and if she didn't kill me, then Edward could run after his distractions all he wanted, and I could follow. I wouldn't let him be distracted. Maybe, when I was beautiful and strong, he wouldn't want distractions. Go back to sleep, she encouraged me. I'll wake you up when there's something new. Right, I grumbled, certain that sleep was a lost cause now. Alice pulled her legs up on the seat, wrapping her arms around them and leaning her forehead against her knees. She rocked back and forth as she concentrated. I rested my head against the seat, watching her. And the next thing I knew, she was snapping the shade closed against the faint brightening in the eastern sky. What's happening? I mumbled. They've told him no, she said quietly. I noticed at once that her enthusiasm was gone. My voice choked in my throat with panic. What's he going to do? It was chaotic at first. I was only getting flickers. He was changing plans so quickly. What kinds of plans? I pressed. There was a bad hour, she whispered. He'd decided to go hunting. She looked at me, seeing the incomprehension in my face. In the city, she explained. It got very close. He changed his mind at the last minute. He wouldn't want to disappoint Carlyle, I mumbled. Not at the end. Probably, she agreed. Will there be enough time? As I spoke, there was a shift in the cabin pressure. I could feel the plane angling downward. I'm hoping so. If he sticks to his latest decision, maybe. What is that? He's going to keep it simple. He's just going to walk out into the sun. Just walk out into the sun. That was all. It would be enough. The image of Edward in the meadow, glowing, shimmering like his skin was made of 1,000,000 diamond facets. It was burned into my memory. No human who saw that would ever forget. The Volturi couldn't possibly allow it. Not if they wanted to keep their city inconspicuous. I looked at the slight grey glow that shone through the opened windows. We'll be too late, I whispered, my throat closing in panic. She shook her head. Right now, he's leaning toward the melodramatic. He wants the biggest audience possible, so he'll choose the main plaza under the clock tower. The walls are high there. He'll wait till the sun is exactly overhead. So we have till noon? if we're lucky, if he sticks with this decision. The pilot came on over the intercom, announcing first in French and then in English our imminent landing. The seatbelt lights dinged and flashed. How far is it from Florence to Volterra? That depends on how fast you drive. Bella? Yeah? She eyed me speculatively. How strongly are you opposed to Grand Theft Auto? Thank you for listening to this part of New Moon. If you'd like to hear the next episode and this entire audiobook right now, then join me on Patreon at patreon.com/downtosleep. Before you head out, please hit that like and subscribe, and if you need some more free readings tonight, check out the channel to find another book to listen to. Until next time, good night.